first of all, let's talk about the election. I mean, the results of what we're seeing in the House of Representatives, that's the only thing that's up in the air right now. We know how the presidential election went. We know how the Senate went. How are you feeling about that?
Well, from a Republican standpoint, pretty good, because we had a conference call this morning I was telling you about that we're going over a lot of the races, and the ones that are close, they have a pretty good margin of votes that are in favor of our Republican candidate, like Ken Calvert down in Southern California and John Duarte in Central California. I'm optimistic about those holding, but California does have a large amount of ballots to count, and it could swing. But when the trend is going in a certain direction, it's really hard to make it cross over with a particular group of votes. As I think today's votes, this era of votes, they're a lot less polarized one party versus the other on late ballots or late drop ballots. So I think the mixture of what you have kind of tends to stay more the same as more and more people, like for example, Republicans were kind of hesitant to drop their ballot any sooner than Election Day, and so I think there's a more squarer mix, so to speak.
I mean, we'll see what happens. What I'm curious about is, we have a Republican president, right? We have a conservative majority on the court, a Republican majority in the Senate. If the House keeps its majority Republican, do you think that there's any downside for Americans? Because we know not all Americans are Republicans.
Well, you're asking the wrong guy for that, but I think being serious, I think if we have a chance to do the things that we talk about, the values we're trying to bring, and we end up with stronger prosperity, a stronger America, better relations internationally, and being able to back up our ally Israel and to solve this Ukraine situation to some outcome instead of bleeding off Ukrainians and bleeding off even Russians on that. It's just, I think that our plan for the economy, for energy, it's going to make a lot of sense to most people. Now, some will never like what I do or agree with what we do, but if they can do that, at least enjoying prosperity while it happens, then that's good. If they want to have a $7 coffee and still cuss me out, but at least they're doing that in prosperity, that's okay.
You mentioned energy. So I'm hearing that oil production is actually higher than it was, maybe even back in 2019. What are some of the things we can do when it comes to energy to lower prices?
It's always the old supply and demand situation, and the less we're dependent on or perceived to be dependent on foreign oil sources, foreign gas, and we have plenty of natural gas in this country. The oil, but we have plenty of oil underneath.
But we're producing more oil right now.
Well, our demand is higher than ever, though, too. We've now we get all these electric car mandates that might change that or something, but the country runs on diesel, and it's going to for the foreseeable future, at least 50 more years. And I don't know how we're going to have electric tractors, totally electric trains, all that. So, but the abundance that we can produce here will help bring the prices down because we won't be subject to what the OPEC countries are dictating. So, and the same goes with electricity, though. Our source of generation needs to be reasonably priced, and unfortunately, solar and wind aren't going to be the total be-all, end-all on that. We still have to have hydropower that we have abundantly here on Feather River and Pitt River and used to have up on the Klamath. And there's a lot of excitement over these, what's called SMR, small modular reacters, nuclear power, and it's getting bipartisan support.
In California or all across the country?
No, we're going to be, I don't know how soon California get it because of the politics of it, but we're holding on to the Diablo Canyon reactor for an additional 5 years. That's important. But if we can have energy sources that are reasonably priced, and nuclear makes so much power in such a small space versus, a solar array takes many, many acres. And there's all these plans for like a solar array out by Butte College and other areas down by, I think, Palermo and Yuba County and stuff. And people aren't excited about having pristine land, whether it's ag land, even San Joaquin Valley. They want to change it from farms to solar farms is what they talk about. And that ain't good. It has its place, it has its niche, but we have to have lower cost energy from natural gas, hydro, nuclear, and let's use some of this biomass that we burn up in the forest too, and maybe even rice straw.
Yeah.
as a way to dispose of those products, but make a 24/7 base load power.
Do you worry about earthquakes with that Diablo power plant? I think about that sometimes.
Well, they designed it around that,
Yeah.
so they have shutdown capabilities to do that. But wherever you live in this country, you've got the threat of a hurricane, you've got an earthquake, flood, whatever it's going to be, and you have to not live your life just afraid of all risk.
Yeah.
And so Diablo Canyon was engineered very well, and I believe it has 40 years of usable life left at least. So let's maximize that, and before we take 9% of the grid offline. That's what it represents. 9% of all of California's power.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about President Trump. I know, of course, you can't speak for him, but there's been a lot of talk about him working with people like RFK Jr.
Absolutely.
Doing some reforms with healthcare, maybe even Elon Musk. I mean, could you foresee people like that being on his cabinet? And do you think, it's kind of unorthodox. Do you think that could be beneficial for the country?
Well, that's an exciting part of this. Trump is an unorthodox guy, obviously.
Yeah.
And, some people love him for it, some really dislike him for that. But in him bringing aboard RFK Jr., Robert Kennedy, was, I think, a real stroke for bipartisanship. And so for people that are, skeptical, look at what happens there. I'm really excited about that part. And if Elon Musk can be part of a government reform, coming in and analyzing, this guy's brilliant, obviously. We've seen his space program and the amazing things with that rocket being able to be clinched by that the stand there. You saw that. So it's an exciting time, and I think there should be appeal to not traditional Republican voters on that. Even though, I know Trump can be obnoxious to people or this or that, but I think we have a bipartisan edge to this. With Tulsi Gabbard came aboard. She was a great colleague I had in the House for several years. Then she ran for president, and her own party kind of blackballed her for daring to speak out against certain issues. She went from Democrat to independent. Now she's a Republican, and she wants to be part of this. So that should create some excitement. And for independent voters and some of our Democrat voters, just look at what we try and do here, because it's going to be for prosperity for Americans. It's going to be for independence for Americans, and we're going to export that as well. We want to, Trump wants to avoid wars, and RFK does too. We all want to avoid that. We would like to see the Middle East be much more stable. We saw the day after the election when Hamas says, it's time for peace after this horrific war situation. And Trump, I think, is going to help find a way on this Ukraine deal. Now, it's going to require negotiation as well. But Ukraine needs to, come to what they can live with, and I think the U.S. will be there to back it up, and also, end the bleeding for both sides. It's really ugly, and there won't be anything left if we're allowed this to go for 30 years. I'm curious
to see what's going to happen, because he's said that a couple of times. Hey, put me in office and give me 24 hours, and I'll end these wars. I think everybody's just watching and waiting, because we haven't heard a game plan for doing it, right? So
I wouldn't have really thought 24 hours, but in the sense that Hamas, within 24 hours, says they want to sue for ending the war and getting peace, he kind of already backed that up without even doing it. But it's pretty wild. Well, and so I'm optimistic on this.
Okay. Another thing that one of the big promises from the president-elect is really expelling people who are here in this country illegally. And here in our area, we do have a higher immigrant population, especially in some of the more agricultural areas. Could you envision us seeing a larger ICE presence in the not so distant future?
I think that will be a requirement, is having a strong presence of, whether it's ICE or along the border itself. That was a pledge that's been made for a long time, is to secure our border. And people are allowed to come in with visas, with permits, but there's people that have overstayed their visas dramatically a long time, whether it's student visas or work visas or whatever. You have to follow rules, and if it requires deportation, I know Trump wants to start with some of the very dangerous people that have come across to, and if we're talking about long-time residents here, then we had a farm worker legislation that we worked on to try and find a legal status for long-time workers that people know, that have been vetted, they have a good background. So there's a mixture we can work on here. But what we've had, the border being just a sieve, and these recent arrivals, millions and millions, we can't have that.
Right.
And so there will have to be some level of
I
deportation.
mean, change is coming, right? But I'm just curious about in an area like ours where there are probably a lot of people who maybe are here without the proper paperwork, but play a big role in our agricultural community. I'm just curious if you have any insight into like some of the impacts that could mean for everybody.
Well, check out our legislation. We passed twice through the House called the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, and that directly addressed ag workers like that didn't have a legal status.
Yeah.
You know, the government's been looking the other way. Everybody's been looking the other way on that
Right.
as kind of this uneasy arrangement. But it's not good for them either. It would be better for them to have a legal status. So if they could have a work permit, and maybe that eventually turns into a green card after a period of years with the pledge to stay in
Yeah.
agriculture. Those are things we can work out. So it's not just a mass deportation
Right.
thing, because, you know, those workers are needed. But on the other hand, so many people have come in abusing the asylum system and when they're looking for economic relief or something. So that can't be. They can't come here and get on what the taxpayers are, direly paying for. It's costing very much for lower income, middle income families, and they're losing opportunities. The schools, the healthcare system, and some of these smaller towns where they're being planted in the Midwest, being flown in. It's so blatantly bad. Something dramatic does have to go in the other direction. I think we'll find the so-called happy medium on that, but there's folks that should not be here, and I think Trump and the new House and Senate will start with that criminal element that has been coming in, where Venezuela's just emptied its jails, for example, and the people that are trafficking, human trafficking, the sex trafficking, all of it is just horrific of what people are being subjected to, that they're even bringing across. The cartels have so much power. I think Trump has spoken about, and I agree with it, Mexico, we need to get their attention on this. You know, if you're going to be a trading partner with us, if you're going to be a neighboring friend, you need to do a lot better job of who you're allowing to flow through your country, whether it's on the trains or other methods, cartels bringing them, and just coming across our border. But we have an obligation too to secure our border. I've been down there several times, and you can just see them just coming across. They're walking right past us. And our country, this current administration is welcoming that. It's a green light, and so we have to do a lot better.
Well, you mentioned relations with other countries. One thing that we're expecting is to see tariffs put in place, right? And I think one concern that some people have, Americans who are tired of spending so much money, is that we're going to see prices rise just across the board. What is your view on that?
They have to be applied thoughtfully, because it can hurt the ag sector, it can hurt other manufacturing as well. I mean, but I don't just want to see us as a country, as a economy, keep exporting our jobs and our factories. Like, for example, John Deere was considering putting a factory in Mexico. No, that needs to be in the Midwest, you know. And I'm not here to dictate what they do, but there might be a consequence for that if you do so. And China is going to load up Mexico with cheaply built electric cars and flood our market here. So if we're going to have this electric car market, I'd rather they be American built.
I mean, it makes sense when you put it like that, and when you hear what the president-elect is saying, it makes sense. More jobs in America, more manufacturing in America. But I think that at the end of the day, we all just want to put food on our table. You know, even for myself, I'd love to go to downtown Chico, shop local, but I go to a store there, and the same thing I see on Amazon for $5 is $25. And it's tough when inflation is so insane right now. I think Americans are just trying to get by, and I think people are afraid that during a transition period of putting more jobs in manufacturing at home, that we're the ones drowning in expenses we can't afford.
Well, you hit on an important point there. Cutting costs means that businesses can be more competitive if their costs aren't driven so much by government regulation, taxation, the cost of energy, and the cost of money itself for borrowing, for example. If inflation can be driven by interest rates, and so if our interest rates continue to trend up, I think they're tailing off finally, but if they get much higher, the national debt is going to have a heck of a time servicing the debt, but so are regular people. When the economy locally is stronger, then people will be more likely to afford, and the stores can keep their prices a bit lower. You know, Amazon and other big boxes, they prospered well from the COVID economy when everything was forced to be shut down, and all the mom and pops. We're seeing downtown here in Chico with restaurants closing and so many things that are closing down, and that just kills your downtown economy and the local tax base. An important one I saw on a little broader level, due to regulation and the water shortage, for example, in the San Joaquin Valley, land values are coming down drastically, which means farmers, their legacy, their retirement is going to be upside down and ruined. The local economy, people that work on those farms, and that is all driven by water policy and an expensive policy on energy and ag inputs. So it ripples through everything, because when those land values crunch down there, and that happens up here, and they just passed a tax measure on this ballot here in Butte County. It's going to be 9.25%, for example, in Chico for sales tax. That's LA type numbers, because they don't have enough money to run the sheriff's department, the DA, and the probation and all that. What happens if ag values go down even more, because that's such a big part of the property tax base here? Like, it's going down half to 2/3 in the San Joaquin Valley, because the ag land doesn't have water and doesn't have its value. If that happens here downtown, local businesses will be hurt even more, because the county will have to come after more money then.
Well, I mean, how is politics going to fix water shortage issue?
Build Sites Reservoir, get on it, raise Shasta Dam, and that all the water that they're using environmentally that isn't really benefiting species to the level of the amount of water being lost needs to be redirected towards agriculture.
Are you following sites pretty closely? I mean, it seems like we're
closely,
seeing steps forward, and it seems like there continues to be little hurdles, but I think we're moving forward.
A recent hurdle, we were concerned about it, but it seemed more to be about
like
refiling some paperwork, and so I think it's fine. It's making progress, but I don't know, I have some dark humor, I guess. I tell a joke that, well, the Great Lakes were formed by glaciers. I guess Sites Reservoir is being done at a glacial pace,
Glacial pace, for sure. It seems like it has bipartisan support, though, this one.
Largely. I mean, we have some of our Democrat colleagues, Mr. Garamendi, Mr. Thompson, and others here in California, but there's hesitance in Sacramento. Newsom has come on board and been a little bit more supportive, but if he really wanted to make it happen, he'd light a fire underneath the Water Commission and the State Water Resources Control Board and have them help us more so. If he really wanted to light a fire, and he's got 2 years left, if he wants to have a legacy and if he wants to run in 28 for president or something, he should be getting on board with this stuff.
So many things I want to talk about. The Affordable Care Act. Do you think, I know that the president-elect has talked about doing away with that. Do you think that's going to happen, and what do you think the implications of that could be?
Again, we're talking about things that drive costs. So we have to address in the Affordable Care Act, why is health care getting even more expensive? What are we doing that is driving that? What should have happened pre the Affordable Care Act was, let's define the group of people we're really trying to help, instead of redefining it for everyone. And that ended up being more a group of seniors and lower income folks that were having difficulty getting health care insurance. But we had to change it for everything in that program. That's what we were warning about. This is back in 2013 when it was kicking in. And we haven't seen prices go lower. The prescription drug program that Bush put in, I mean, drugs aren't getting a lot cheaper. So I'm excited what Robert Kennedy is going to be looking at on health and helping to bring his unique perspective on that. Again, we're going to have a different mix at the table here, and we need to listen to him on that. We need to listen to a lot of people. We need to listen to the doctors, the pharmacists up here. There's some local pharmacists up they've worked with up in Tehama County and such. Some good local people that need help to be able to continue to thrive. We can't just all go to big boxes every time for everything, because you get that personal touch. And so why can't they compete too? And so what Kennedy's looking at on pharmaceuticals, I think is going to be pretty exciting too, because and food, how healthy food is. At home we talk about this, that the stuff that's in our food really affects our health. That makes sense, but we're kind of used in this country to eating some marginal things, and it's not as exciting to order out anymore when you don't know what the heck is in it. So I think even compared to like European versions of the same snack food we have in this country, it's something we really need to look at.
Weird additives, weird things. I mean, as a politician, I'm working with the FDA at certain points. I mean, do you have faith in how that agency is running and
right
doing
now,
its
no.
job?
Right now, I think, I mean, again, I hate to be over the line on it, but when the same people that work for pharmaceuticals take jobs at FDA, and the FDA goes into pharmaceuticals, there's a little too much, it's a little too incestuous for me there to really feel comfortable about it. especially on top of this COVID deal, okay? On the so-called vaccines, I mean, I think a lot of misinformation. And Kennedy's going to be strong on saying that, you know, what was wrong with hydroxychloroquine? What was wrong with ivermectin? What was wrong with early treatment with things that we had available regularly? Ivermectin was a Nobel Prize winning
Yeah. It was weird what
compound.
happened there.
Yeah.
I got to ask you, we only have a minute and a half left. I've got to ask you about the campfire. And, you know, I know you've been really fighting for that bill to pass. Do you think that having a Republican majority in the House and in the Senate would make it more likely that we get that thing across the finish line, or does it not really matter?
Well, if that is somehow seen as an incentive to do it now with the people that are in Congress now and the majorities there, you know, in the Democrat-controlled Senate, maybe it'll be an incentive. But I haven't given up faith that in the next 5 weeks of session we have before adjournment for Christmas and then coming back for swearing in, that bill should be able to move in the Senate. You know, when we talked before, we believe pretty strongly that Senator Schumer put a hold on that bill at the last minute before we adjourned for this 6 weeks to come home and, you know, campaign.
Yep.
That bill should have passed the Senate. But we believe that because Senator Rick Scott from Florida had a fairly tough race down there, and that part of the bill benefited hurricane victims as well as fire victims in California and the train ones in Ohio. It was a broad bill, but still helpful. That politics played into that. So now the politics are behind us. Thankfully, the election's over. Everybody can take a sigh of relief, and I think that the bill will pass. We have some of our friends coming back to advocate for it here next week, and so I think it'll get over the line. Should it not, it'll be the first bill I introduce on January 3 when we go back in. But I'm more optimistic than that too. That fire victims, hurricane victims, and the train incident there, those are all going to pull weight. And we don't have a problem with our senators. There was only one senator that stopped it at the end. Our California senators are on board, so we'll see what happens.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much for being here.
Okay, thank you,
All
Haley.
right.